Spent hours every day reading about chess, about openings, chess history, and games played between world champions, grandmasters, all of us. Trained with our 400 lessons, and even it's a symmetrical position, and I do have a slight space advantage in the sense that I have c4 against c6, but that's not much. The b3 pawn may be weak. It may be a strength, strengthening the center, opening the a file, but it's not at all clear whether that is. At this point in time, it was very important to think about possible candidate moves, and I think this is one of those positions which is surprisingly concrete. Normally, you would think that the position is fairly dull, the queens have been exchanged, it's symmetrical. But if you look long enough, you can see that there are certain things that black wants to achieve, that white wants to achieve, and that a lot of things can still happen. So at this point, I was thinking that if black were to move, he would probably take on t2. Then I would take back with the bishop, since knight d2 would hang the pawn on d4, and he would probably play bishop to e4 with an extremely solid position, which I don't think that I would be able to break down. So my next move came to me very, very naturally, that I played e3. E3 is always a move you're a little bit wary of making when you got a bishop on f4, since now it's got no escape squares backwards. But I felt that concretely I could do it, and that was really all it was about. No considerations of whether it may look dangerous and I'm not sure I should do it. It was just a case of, I feel like e3 is positionally desirable, and if I don't see any way the bishop on f4 is going to be in trouble, then I'm going to play it. Now, he played the move knight to a6. Once again, now knight takes d2 would be quite pointless, because of knight d2 attacking the pawn on d5, and I think in this case releasing the tension favorably for me. So he played knight a6, and this was the main move that I was looking at when I was playing, when I was thinking about e3. Because now it's not that easy to see what white is going to do. Black has a very clear plan of putting the knight on b4, exploiting that weakened square that this double pawn has created, and also there's a square on d3 which has been created by my pawn push to e3. But now that I've found some stability on d4 with e3, and his pawn is no longer protected on d5, I started to think that it would be really, really, really nice if the diagonal could be opened for this bishop on g2, and it could at some point take the pawn on d5, which would ruin his entire queenside construction. So what I did is I took on d5, take on d5, and I went g4, underlining the importance of thinking concretely and finding candidates moves in these sort of situations. Maybe the move g4 never crosses your mind, but if it does, I'm sure for a lot of you, you cannot get it out of your mind, because the complications that follow transform a game that threatened to be quite dull into something very concrete and I think quite exciting. So what happened is he took the pawn on g4. Once again, not so easy to find a way to keep the solidity of his position here. If he takes on d2, I take back, and he has to put the bishop on this very awkward square on e6. Now I got several ideas. First one that comes to my mind is to play knight to b1. The knight will later go to b3. Once again, underlying the importance of these candidate moves. If you don't look at, you may not look at the move knight b1 at all, but once you look at it, you understand that it's the right move positionally. The knight from c3 blocks the c file for his rooks, and will keep the pressure on d5 for a long time, since this bishop on e6 doesn't really, it's not really possible for it to move, and he will not be able to solidify his position by playing e6 the way that I played e3. So it's simply a very pleasant position for white. So he sort of has to take the challenge instead and take the pawn. I take d4, knight d2. And I remember I spent a lot of time here on the previous moves, calculating the force lines here. Not so much because I was unsure of whether this concept was correct or not. Mainly, I just found it so fascinating to look at these forcing lines, and I was just captivated by them until I realized that I have to move at some point, and this time can be spent calculating later on as well. Anyway, what he did, I'm just going to show a few further moves. He played f5, I went f3. He went, if he goes ef3, I take back with the knight. You can see, for instance, if black takes the knight, I take with the bishop, and this bishop pair is now extremely powerful, pointing against his queen side. The pawn on b7 will fall, the pawn on a7 will fall, and my bishops rule the board. If he does not take on f3, I have ideas like knight to e5 with the same sort of ideas, opening up for both bishops, and also knight to g5, then later on bishop d5 check, or knight e6 could wreak some havoc. So he decided quite cleverly to throw in the move e5 instead. Now he makes sure that in the case of d5, as happened, ef3, knight takes f3, that the knight is not going to e5. And this is also one of those cases where every single one of my pawns are doubled or isolated. And yet it seems that every time you have a bunch of isolated and double pawns, you have a lot of activity and squares for the pieces. Right now, for instance, the pawn on e3 is covering the important d4 square, making d4 a very attractive post for the knight. The pawn on e5, it's not clear whether it's a strength or weakness. Or as we can see in the game, one more move, rook to e8, threatening bishop f3, followed by bishop to e5. Black would be very much okay here if the pawn was an a2, but with the pawn on b3, I have the move rook to a5, keeping up the pressure, protecting e5. Though the position is very I'm gonna leave it here. The position is still very complicated, but eventually I prevailed after an exciting fight. And this is really all you need to know, how the position transformed from a pretty dull one where it seemed that it was destined to be a draw till one where everything is possible. And for more examples like this of positional play, of dynamic play, of candidate moves, talking about ideas, calculation, all of these things you can find on the Magnus trainer, and even better explained than I just did.